Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Also, I've just noticed that it's 3:55. I do apologise for the slight delay. So, welcome to using digital media to support our SEND and EHCP learners. So, my colleague and myself will do some introductions in a second. We'll be delivering this on behalf of South Devon College. And in true teacher fashion, we just share some objectives at the moment. So, the three objectives really are to share our experiences using digital media. And how we've used it effectively to support our SEND and vulnerable students throughout the COVID lockdown and beyond. And indeed, we're still using some of the best bits even now and into the future. So also to reflect on what's worked and what we've learned, the lessons learned, and also to share some examples of best practice. So just to introduce ourselves, so my name's Alex Howarth, and I'm Head of SEND and Vulnerable Learners at South Devon College. I also oversee the curriculum for learning opportunities, and I'm also the Head of Tutorial at the college.
And good afternoon, I'm Natalie Peakman. I'm one of the senior curriculum heads here at South Devon College, and the area that I look after here is re-engagement and our positive intervention team. So just wanted to start you off with a little bit of context about where the college is situated and what that means to us in terms of the learners that we have here at the college. So South Devon College is found in Torbay in the southwest of lovely England, and we are in an area which has high multiple indices of deprivation. So Torbay is ranked as the most deprived local authority area in the southwest region, and it's in the top 20 in England as well. What that means for us is that 1 in 4 of the young people in our area are living in poverty. We've got high, and due to the COVID situation, rising levels of unemployment around Torbay. We have a higher number of NEET comparatively, and we also got a higher number of SEND learners comparatively as well. So we are fortunate to be situated right in the heart of Torbay, right in the centre, and so the learners that we have coming to us are generally from around Torbay and the two areas next door. So we've got from Devon and South Hams and Plymouth and Exeter a little bit further away as well. So the college itself is a general further education college, so we've got a very wide range of courses and programs available to learners in this area. We have approximately 10,000 students per year, and that ranges from learners who are studying 14 to 16 in our high school and home educated learners through to A-level students, vocational courses, entry level through to level 3, 4. We've got apprentices as well, and we go all the way right up to degree level 6, BSc or BA honours as well. As I said, we take learners from age 14 plus, so we've got a high school where we've got around 200 learners, and electively home educated learners accessing our provision, there's around 60 of those as well.
So our EHCP SEND and vulnerable learner list as at lockdown last year, March 2019, looked like this. March 2020, it looked like this. So we had 221 education and healthcare plan students aged between 14 and 24. So that made up the mainstay of our EHCP, our vulnerable learners. And we also had a group of learners who were either looked after or were care leavers. You see the numbers there, as well as child in need and some non-statutory social care placements as well. So these are people that are assigned with social workers, and they were split between our Torbay, Devon, Plymouth and Cornwall. So we support a wide range of learners across the whole patch between Exeter, Plymouth, as you can see there. So the numbers that we've got now in terms of 284 education and healthcare plan learners, the reason partly for the increase in that is because we've developed some new provision within the college, and this provision is to work with vulnerable students, and Natalie's going to talk about that a little bit later. And we're also, with the success of the work that we actually done with regards to our lockdown, supporting students in lockdown, we were still having students enrolling on programs during that period of time, from March onwards as well. So and we're aware, as we all are, within our communities, within our local economies, the opportunities aren't necessarily as good as they were, and particularly where we are, in terms of the local economies, it's been impacted. And so education, for some of these young people that would normally be leaving with an education and healthcare plan, they've made a decision to actually remain. Not many of them, interestingly enough, but there's a whole sort of story behind that increase in education and healthcare plans.
So just to talk about some of the offer that we have here. So alongside our very broad but standard vocational and academic options that the learners can study, we also offer a range of alternative provision to meet the needs of our young people in Torbay. So the intent of these programs is to engage the young people into meaningful learning and secure progression onto mainstream vocational or academic provision at the end of it, or into employment, in fact. So the different things that we offer, so learning opportunities is our provision for learners with moderate learning difficulties and disabilities, so some specialist courses that are centred around the needs of those learners. We've got foundation learning, which is our level 1 provision, where learners are able to have tasters in different vocational areas alongside developing their English and maths and personal social development skills. There's high levels of support in that group to help them be successful. We also have the Lodge here at the college, which is our area for learners with ASD. So if learners are finding it overwhelming working in the classrooms or during break time and lunch times, then they can access that provision. It's always got members of staff in there able to support with those learners, so they can take their schoolwork along there to do if they need to, or they can just sit in there and relax without being kind of overstimulated and stressed in the wider college environment. Courses to Careers is our provision to re-engage NEET learners or those at risk of becoming NEET, so not in education or training. So these courses are very much geared around learners developing their personal social development skills and employability alongside their English and maths. So we do lots of work with them to support them so that in the next opportunity, either next academic year or in year, they can progress forward onto some mainstream provision. We have a very similar provision for our young parents in Torbay, but alongside the sort of standard personal social development, we also offer kind of parent craft, and we have a free creche for that provision, so the young parents can bring their babies along with them, and they can be looked after sort of next door to where they're learning their English and maths, and they can be sort of secure in the knowledge that their little babies are being looked after while they're learning. The Directed Study Centre is for our learners who have got sort of particularly severe mental health difficulties, so perhaps severe anxiety or depression, or perhaps they're phobic about coming into an educational establishment, find it too much to go into mainstream provision. So we work with them on their English, maths and personal and social development, so that we get them to a place where they feel confident enough, I guess, to go into some of the mainstream provision that the college offers. And then finally, we work really closely with our local authorities, particularly with Torbay Local Authority, and they've commissioned some bespoke places from us for learners who are really hard to reach. So these learners have education, health and care plans. They are high risk of becoming NEET. Most of them are known to social care and have lots of external factors that influence their ability to attend education in any way. So we have a bespoke timetable for those learners, and they're allocated a one-to-one mentor for the time that they're in college, who supports them all the way through that provision. Okay, so As we came into the lockdown in March, we were sort of keeping our eye on, obviously, all of the government guidelines that were being published quite frequently. I think some of the people earlier on today mentioned how, it's quite a task keeping up with everything as it came out to us in education. One of the things, obviously, was that we were to assess otherwise vulnerable learners in our college, and the learners that we added in, other than the ones that we've spoken to you about already, were our young adult carers, learners who we had assessed as a risk of disengaging at the college, and learners who were accessing our positive intervention support. So the college has a positive intervention team who are a support of specialist staff who provide pastoral support to learners, from everything from trouble with relationships to financial issues, and more and more dealing with mental ill health issues with our learners. So those learners who we felt would really struggle a little bit with the lockdown situation, we had added them onto our list as well.
So that was just to set the scene, really, in terms of our curriculum, and you can sort of see there the range of young people that we've got, of all levels, of all skills, of all backgrounds, and some with some quite complex needs as well. And so what we had to do was to focus on a positive engagement, welfare and safeguarding. And it was really important that alongside learning, because we are a learning establishment, teaching and learning is our core business. But for students to make, young people to make progress, for them to achieve, they have to feel good, they have to feel engaged, they have to feel valued, they have to have that welfare check in place as well, and they have to be safe. So all of this has to happen together for it to be effective. And so this is why, for us, the idea of digital media was so important. And we'll start to talk now about how we've engaged with that. So risk assessments were completed for all vulnerable learners. That's not a surprise. That was a statutory duty. But having said that, we'd already commenced this piece of work leading up to the lockdown. A lot of education providers were in similar circumstances, whereby young people and their parents were anxious. They were voting with their feet. We were starting to see students staying away from college, so we were then making those telephone calls, having those conversations with parents and multiple stakeholders, multiple agencies, and that continued, actually. And that whole principle of risk assessment is dynamic. We were constantly assessing that risk. We were constantly having those conversations. We were constantly looking to these collaborative approaches within the agencies, and informing what our processes were as a result of that. And that's why using these tools, using this digital approach, we were so effective, not just engagement with learners, but engaging with our partners as well. So any contact that we had with our vulnerable learners was logged. So we set up a new system, a digital system, which was just around vulnerable learners. And that gave us, from the first day of lockdown, it gave us a real transparent insight into what was actually happening with these learners, and what the work was that was being undertaken, and how effective it was as well. And I'll sort of talk you through this in a second. The other thing just to mention there, by the 23rd of March, it was obvious, I think, to everybody, I think Cheltenham Festival, and then we sort of knew that this was going to happen, and we'd already started to plan for this. So we put a team of people around each of our vulnerable learners. So each one of those individuals on that list had a team of people working with them. So the personal tutor wasn't new. Every full-time student has a personal tutor. EHCP students, some of them with high needs, might have a one-to-one, some of them don't, but we made the decision that all of our vulnerable learners would have an allocated learning support assistant. There's other iterations of that role across college, but that was dedicated. The SENCOs as well, we shared all of our vulnerable learners amongst the SENCO team, similarly with the positive intervention team, and similarly with the heads of tutorial. So, and for this to work effectively, digital media was necessary. We needed a platform where we could share, where we could collaborate again, and monitor progress and engagement and welfare and all of those things. So first of all, so that was the initial starting point. So by the 23rd of March, that was already in place. Then throughout the lockdown, bi-weekly meetings amongst the teams there that you can see, talking about at-risk learners, talking about the support we were offering, talking about the things that were working, the things that weren't working, any additional interventions that we needed to use. And I'll talk about the value of Microsoft Teams in a minute, but this was remarkable in terms of how much it fit into the piece of work that we actually needed to do. And then we were able to offer support every weekday from the 23rd of March right the way through to the end of college, and that covered half terms, that covered Easter. We were still there, we were still available, we were still engaging on that day-to-day basis to check. So timelines wise, we had, it's all built around obviously the 23rd of March, but we did some activity before then, and we'd already had our first case locally in a school at the beginning of March, just before the 12th of March, and that set the hairs racing really. There was a lot of movement, and things were starting to happen with the local authority. We were having those conversations, those meaningful conversations. So we put together a virtual SENCO forum for post-16. We started to talk to the other providers. We started to talk to the local authorities. We started to talk about the work that we were doing, the provision that we had, what resources that we had to support those people, and that was quite informative, and the value of that, I think, retrospectively was important actually, because that allowed us to develop some really strong relationships that then worked through the whole of the lockdown. Then we got the 16th of March, so this was the week before, and we talked to the LSAs, the learning support team, and we got them to download Teams. That was our preferred package, Microsoft Teams, and then from the week commencing the 16th and the 23rd, we then engaged with the LSAs, and we asked them to go out and start to make contact with their named students. So they then started to use this for the first time. Many of these staff weren't necessarily IT savvy at this point, and there was a little bit of anxiety around using this, but they weren't reluctant. That was important. They could see the value in actually using this tool, and what it enabled us to do, because we got in early, they were practicing themselves and they were practicing with their learners. They were starting to make conversations, to make contact, and that confidence that grew over that period of time, and the way in which we were able to evidence that really, really helped us, because there was a bit of a lag. I think it's fair to say teaching and learning from the 23rd of March, because of the impact on what that actually meant, and the college closure, and the whole provision going online, or teaching and learning going online. This had a big impact, and there was a delay in the teachers, getting the training, putting those resources up in place. But what we were able to do is to maintain that contact with that really, really important cohort at that point in time. And as I said, it was virtuous, because everybody was developing confidence. We had weekly catch-up sessions for the LSAs, again on Teams, just collaborative, just talking about things that were working, things that weren't. The LSAs were all invited into the course-specific Teams group, so any vocational or subject-specific group that was actually set up, where staff had vulnerable learners. They were aware of those vulnerable learners. They were aware of who their named learning support assistants were. Those learning support assistants took part in that learning, teaching and assessment, and were able to support those sessions as well. And then we had the vulnerable learning logs, which I alluded to earlier. Really important that there's transparency on there, so we can see who was logging what, when they were logging it, who they were talking to, when was the last time that a student was spoken to or engaged with, what the gaps are, what we need to do about that. And really that evidence base there was incredibly valuable when it came later on to the reasonable endeavours. We have statutory duties with all of these learners, and when you go back and look at the logs, look at the work that was being done, it's really, really clear. We've got a great evidence base that we were, at least meeting those statutory duties, if not exceeding those statutory duties in a number of cases. So, we assessed and completed risk assessments, but as I said before, it's a dynamic process. So we were continually going back and re-evaluating any risks as they came up. We were able at this time during lockdown as well, we had some CPD provision that we'd already brought in for educational psychologists. So they were able to deliver training, CPD training, to hundreds of staff at a time. And the focus for them was, around the value of coaching in education. What about attachment disorders or attachment concerns with young people, childhood trauma and the impact on what that means for adolescent learning. This is really, really valuable stuff that really informs sort of teaching, learning and assessment, not just for the teachers, but for all of the staff that are wrapped around supporting those students. And that was a resource that we put out there on Teams, delivered. And so the knock-on benefit of that was we feel significant. And then we also offered that on-site provision, as I said, throughout for those that were hardest to reach. So where we were doing those dynamic risk assessments, if those students were facing challenges with their mental health, for example, we were talking to social care teams, we were talking to them, we were talking to their parents, we'd be bringing them in. And the local authority was very supportive of that. In some cases, there were, one young lady was being taxied from Exeter, and the local authority with the social care team were putting that into place because of their mental health. So we were able to provide that support, that wraparound support, whether or not that was online or in person, throughout that time.
So just to sort of go through some of those initial steps taken in a little bit more detail. So as mentioned, it was quite challenging to keep up with all the government guidance and the changes that they made to what we were needing to do and provide for our learners. So we kept our ears close to the ground for any changes coming up and responded to those. And as Alex said, we obviously had a duty to risk assess all of our learners. But that wasn't something that just happened once and then didn't happen again, because a risk assessment really is only as good as the day that you complete it on. So for any learners that we were working with on this vulnerable learner list, we were completing risk assessments really daily with them. So every conversation we had with those learners, we were recording, and if we felt that there was a need to increase the amount of support that we were providing or to get that learner in on site, that was an approach that we were able to take. We established clear communication links with the learners right from the beginning. So not always necessarily through Teams, but that was the main platform that we decided to use as a college because of its accessibility and ease of use, really. But we also used email, we used Moodle, which is our virtual learning environment here at the college, and we used social media, we used telephone conversations, text messaging, etc. Any way we could actually to make sure that we could get contact with these vulnerable learners and maintain that throughout the lockdown period. So as I say, we identified Teams as our main digital platform that we were going to use. I'll talk to you about some of the others that we've experimented with in a minute as well. But I think it's worth mentioning that actually we did find that where learners, there were some learners that digital platforms were just not going to work for. So be that because they had no device to work on at home, or be that they really struggled with that way of learning, online learning. We were actually printing and posting out packs of work to send to learners and accepting work back from them and marking that work, on paper as well, so that those learners, kind of didn't get missed in the whole moving to online approach. Another thing we did early on was we collated and published to all of our staff and learners all the different types of external support available to students and staff as well. So be that support with their mental health, or that they need to access support, for eating disorders or whatever it might have been. There was all sorts of different websites, help numbers that they could contact, or apps that they could download to their phone, where they had that they could use. As Alex said, we went right the way through all of the holiday periods. The students wouldn't normally have been in college. We were contacting them still each day, but weekends and evenings when we weren't necessarily as contactable, they were able to use that external support as well. And sort of finally, in these very initial steps taken, we wanted to make sure that the students who were entitled to free college meals, so our most impoverished learners really on site, could still access that provision off site. So there was a little bit of a kind of delay between working out how that was going to happen and the funds going out as food vouchers. So in the interim, we made sure that those funds went directly into the students' bank accounts, so that they could access food from their local shops where they needed to as well. So here are some of the digital platforms that we've been using as a college, and some of them we continue to use for various reasons. As we say, Microsoft Teams was our chosen platform, the reason being that it links in so well with all of our existing Microsoft products that we have, 365 products here at the college. So, everything linked in really nicely. But some teachers also had a little go with Google Classroom and had some success with that, particularly useful for being able to do the online teaching and submission of work and marking of work online and returning that work to the learners. We also had teachers experimenting with using social media to engage their learners, so putting little videos and live feeds out on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, for example. Some of it was just for fun, and some of that was learning and lesson and important content that the students needed to know about. We've been using Nearpod with Microsoft Teams to create more interactive presentations for people for learning. So Nearpod, if you haven't used it before, is a really useful tool. You can download your PowerPoints directly into it and then add in interactive slides around questioning and surveying students and checking that their knowledge and that they're learning whatever topic it is that you're teaching them. And then we've got some internal resources that we use, so OnTrack, Navigate, etc., to manage our learners here on site. We also use the standard emails and calling and text messaging, just like we would do, if students were on site as well. So everyday technology being used to support it all.
So the beauty really of Microsoft Teams, as you've seen now, I'm sure many of you have used this, but from a teacher's point of view, and from a support point of view, the facility and the utility of this is quite remarkable, because it's linked, as Nat's just said there, to the whole sort of Microsoft Office suite. And so the functionality in terms of Word, in terms of PowerPoint, in terms of Excel, in terms of all of those things, Outlook, is there and integrated. And then, as well as the things that most of us understand, you've got other new developments, things like Microsoft Stream, which is video content as well, which is an alternative to something like YouTube. So there's a whole package of support that's behind it, and it's very intuitive. So once you get into it as a teacher, you can use it as a virtual learning environment, because you can store resources on there, you can deliver lessons, you can record lessons, you can share chat and dialogue, and so from my point of view, from our point of view as a college, it's really important that learning has to be an active participatory role or an experience for our learners, because if it's active, you can do lots of things there. You can check welfare, you can check engagement, you can avoid social isolation because they can engage with their peers as well. And I know that from my own experience with the schools that a couple of my children go to, that they've made a choice there not to allow video and not to allow sound, but that's a very solitary experience for a young person, particularly a teenager in that formative process. So it was really important. But with that as well, obviously there's an emphasis, a real emphasis on training, on barriers, and making sure that we're clear in terms of safeguarding. So for example, with the video, we were contracting with parents as part of that risk assessment to make sure that they were happy. Your learners obviously had the choice with video. Video was post 16. So there were a number of things that we did there, and we made sure that the guidance was there with all staff. And it was used as an opportunity, as I say, for learning and welfare checks. So the other thing we looked at is contracting with the learners, so to make sure that there were times during the day and on the days that they're in college that they would be accessing support. And the Senkos would regularly drop in, I'd drop in, Nat would drop in. So we were taking part in a sort of a collaborative approach to this, and it really provided a really flexible delivery model. So Microsoft Teams for us was a big part of our digital experience. So this is just a bit of background in terms of what we can do. I won't read this, but our techie team was behind it all the way. We had some digital champions in the college, because that's important, you know, to deliver something like this. To put it out there and to encourage people to use it, they have to understand the value in it. So the students have to understand the value in it, importantly, but the staff do as well. So we had digital champions, we had people that were, you know, ahead of the curve with this. As I said, you know, I think one of the things that made a massive difference was our learning support team, you know, the team that are there day to day at the coalface supporting the students, and they were, you know, waxing lyrical, really positive about this tool in the early stages. And I think that really helped teachers in some cases to come alongside, and also, you know, really engaged with students as well. And so then we were supported by our quality team. You know, we got a great quality team here, TLA shots, so teaching, learning and assessment shots. So these were regular updates that were going out, messages to all staff. So this is about us sharing best practice, about us identifying, you know, the role of learning support in this virtual world, and how, you know, we can do welfare checks, the resources, the tools that we're using. So there's a whole sort of package that we joined up with, and we built this into a strategy to actually deliver this and roll it out. Yeah, next page. And then one of the things that you'll be able to look at if you have access to this presentation, which we're sharing, you'll be able to watch a video, and that's just, again, best practice of a collaborative relationship between tutor and members of staff about how they're using digital media, and the effectiveness of that approach, and what works, what, you know, why it's so valuable in terms of being reinforced by stakeholders. And then, as well as that video, if you look at the link to that video, you've got some testimony there from the young person who's part of that relationship, and has benefited so much from that support during lockdown. So you can actually get their view on that, as well as the learning support assistant. So it was really important that we were sharing that.
One of the things that we do here at the college is we have various themed weeks around the year to sort of celebrate and focus in on particular themes that are you know, relevant to our students here at the college. One of the weeks that we'd planned to have during the lockdown period was our Wellbeing week. So rather than cancel that because of the lockdown, we took that Wellbeing week virtually instead. So some of the things that we did were we arranged for a little kind of fika event. So this was where everybody went and made themselves a cup of tea and then joined each other for a little get together online using Microsoft Teams. And that was a social event rather than a kind of learning event. And it meant that you know, people weren't feeling as socially isolated as they might have done if they, you know, weren't interacting with other people in their group. It filled that void, or helped to fill the void, where learners were sort of missing the social side of college, interacting with their friends and peers while they're here. We've also got little videos that went out that week about staying positive, focused on mental health and strategies that learners could use at home to support their well-being. And we had a hairdressing teacher there who, you know, knowing that people with fringes couldn't get out to the hairdressers and have their fringes trimmed, did some little tips on, you know, how to cut your own fringe at home. So these were kind of nice to have add-ons, but they really helped with the social side of the lockdown, to stop people feeling isolated and to ensure that our college community stayed as one, really. So I think it's useful to note that not all of this went off without a hitch, and there were certainly some big barriers that we needed to get over in the initial stages of our plan to, you know, move to remote delivery. One of the biggest barriers, which, you know, we had to sort of get over, was the barrier of learners and staff, in fact, not having IT resources at home that they could use for their online learning. So as a college, a bit of a heroic effort was done to gather together anything that wasn't nailed down in terms of electronic devices, sort of get those listed, and then sent out and allocated to the learners that really, most needed them. So we sort of assessed which learners were in the greatest need and got those devices out to them as quickly as we could. So the learners either came in and collected them from the college, or in fact, where we couldn't get hold of learners, if we had any concerns about them in terms of their welfare, we actually delivered the equipment directly to their house. And that meant that we could also undertake a visual welfare check and just check in with those learners and make sure they were okay whilst we were doing that as well. We also found that as things progressed and lockdown got longer and longer, some of our most vulnerable learners really started to struggle with their mental health and the sort of social isolation that it had forced them into. So at that stage, we really encouraged some of those learners to come back on site. And we did some activities with them that were very much kind of driven by helping them to improve their well-being. So we did gardening and active outdoor activities with them. So keeping kind of COVID secure, being in a nice big outdoor space we're lucky to have. And making sure that they were, engaging with people and able to come in and access the support face to face that they needed to just get them through that really challenging time.
So we've got a case study here of a high-grade A-level student who has multiple and complex disabilities. She's got a rare degenerative condition. She's, spent a lot of her time in and out of hospital and in and out of care. So the situation for her, as well as all of the anxieties around the circumstances around COVID and the lockdown, on the back of that, she spent very little time. She lives quite a sheltered existence because of her conditions, and she hasn't had the mainstream experience and doesn't have the social groupings and relationships that many young people do have. And we take for granted. So she's, that was her experience coming into lockdown. And so for her, she'd never used, she had no idea how to use Facebook or Instagram. These things were of little value and of little interest for her. So, coming into lockdown, as I say, there was quite a bit of work that we did there to engage and to make sure that we were removing those barriers and we were encouraging her, we were developing her confidence. So as well as the daily sessions that we were running with her, she was at home in isolation, as well as those in terms of the live teaching, we were having support sessions on a daily basis as well for each of her subjects with the learning support assistants, and they were contracted. She's a high grade learner, so she's, we're looking forward to A with this young person. So very, very, very bright, very capable. And what was happening there is during the live lessons, we were supporting and we were using the OneDrive files, we were using Word or notes, and then, live, it was being live updated. So she was able to see what was happening as part of that capture live. And so we were mic'd up to her. She was giving us feedback in terms of what she wanted capturing. So it was a very actively participatory experience, as I say, and that there was identified as best practice. Parents were delighted, and the strength of that experience for us really shows where this worked, and it's enabled us to really think about education in a way in which we can remove these barriers irrespective of whether or not COVID has happened. And this really adds value to young people's experiences and takes us to a whole new level, really.
So just for sort of the last couple of slides, so just wanted to share with you the outcome of some of this work that we did was that 100% of our vulnerable learners were still engaging regularly with the college by the time we got to the end of the academic year. So for us, that was really, really positive because as well as them engaging, what we did know was that those learners were safe and well. So fundamentally that, their welfare was at the heart of everything that we did over that lockdown period. And to know that they were still with us and still, the activities we'd done had been enough to keep them engaged with us was really positive. We also worked really hard in the last half term with these learners to make sure that they all really knew what their progression route was going to be for September. So whether they were staying on at college or whether they were planning to go off to employment or an apprenticeship, we worked hard with them to make sure that that was all set up and ready, so they didn't kind of leave us for the summer thinking that they weren't too sure what they were doing. And the vast majority of them have returned as as was planned in September. So we managed to keep them on the whole time, which has been great. We also did quite a lot of work in that last half term with regards to new applicants coming in to college, because we'd normally do quite long transition with these learners. We'd have them in for several different events at the college so that they could get to know what the college was like and meet other people who were going to be going on to their courses and find out more about their special educational needs, etc. So we did a Head Start programme for all new learners where we used technology to be able to engage them onto their sort of courses that they're interested in before they got to college. So there was a special team set up for people who were champions of the Head Start programme, and those people had responsibility for making sure that there was plenty of content uploaded onto the sites every day, or at least every couple of days, so that the learners stayed engaged and could get used to the thought of coming back into education after such a long break. So
yeah, I think building our success, I think just coming to the end now, we've got excellent relationships. We're very fortunate with our local authorities, although they didn't have the resources in terms of meeting some of these needs. And as Natalie said, we pulled these resources out ourselves in terms of IT kit and training. But they gave us their time, they gave us their expertise, they gave us their as I say, there was a very collaborative approach to doing that, and we're building on that. So really strong focus on reducing needs, and really strong focus on developing our curriculum and learning from the great lessons that we picked up over lockdown and how we can make it even stronger. So as well as this focus on outstanding support all the way through there, there is a very big focus on outstanding learning, teaching and assessment, and that enables us to have very high rates of achievement, progress, etc. So sharing best practice and networks, really important, and embracing, as I say, blended learning approaches, and recognising actually the importance of pastoral and support and welfare as part of that, really. And that's where we are, and that's what we've come through, and that's our experience, really. And I just wanted to just share our contact details. So if anybody's got any questions, or if anybody wants to ask us anything, by all means they can do so now or email us separately.
Thank you, Alex and Natalie, for the great presentation. If anyone has questions or would like to share their own experiences, strategies, what they've used in their own regions, we've just got about 4 minutes, so feel free to share, either chat or you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question in terms of medical needs. We had medical needs for students who were off-site, and so we've got a college nurse, and so we were factoring that in terms of risk assessments about the appropriateness of bringing a student in and how safe they were at home and in college. And also, so for example, we got students with non-epileptic attack disorder, NEAD, which is a particular condition that's relatively new to the college, and so we had learners that were accessing site with that condition, so we had to make sure that the medical team was available, and we'd appropriately risk assess that as well. So that was part of our thinking, and with the vulnerable learning list, we were able to identify what those issues were. For the young person, in terms of medical needs that we talked about in the case study, it wouldn't have been appropriate for her at that point to actually come in, because she was much safer at home. And indeed, We've since she's come back, we've come up to an arrangement whereby we are using Teams. It's like a hybrid interface. So we're using Teams to teach this young person, but she is actually on site because she values that interaction. She values that opportunity to talk to people face to face as well. But she's a big risk. So she herself, has a lot of anxiety about being in a classroom environment and meeting lots of people, rightly so, because she's got a particular acute medical condition. So we're always balancing those things, and we're also, talking to medical professionals, we're talking to parents, and we're constantly looking at what's right for the individual, and making sure that we're able to offer, the range of support that we can.
Okay, any other questions from anybody? Lovely. Okay, so if you do have any others, like we say, feel free to contact us, and our contact details are on the slides that you'll have access to as well. But thanks ever so much for listening today.
Thank you, everyone. Before you leave, this is the end of the workshop and the session, so you're welcome to leave. But before you do, could you fill out the form that Mary has pasted on the chat? And thank you very much for coming.